They thought kidnapping his sister would silence him. Traore made them pay. At 3:19 p.m., the school bell rang and she never came home. Aminata, just 14 years old, the beloved younger sister of President Ibrahim Traoré, vanished somewhere between her classroom and the car waiting outside. Cameras, disabled, guards, drugged. This wasn't random, it was a message. A calculated strike at the heart of a man leading a nation. In a world where justice walks on uncertain ground, what happens when those who can't be bought are attacked through those they love most? Before the storm came silence, but this silence burned. So how do you break a man who refuses to kneel? Outie! Subscribe to follow the story. Share this with someone who believes power makes you untouchable. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Ouagadougou. The sky was warm, traffic loud, and the scent of fried toad drifted down the school gates. At 3:30 p.m., Aminata stepped out of her lycée in a navy blue uniform, her backpack swinging like any other teenager's. She texted her best friend. She smiled at the street vendor who knew her by name. Nothing felt wrong, but by 4:45, her mother's voice cracked on the phone. Aminata wasn't home, and she wasn't answering. President Traoré cancelled a national security briefing in under 60 seconds, because when routine disappears, silence becomes a signal. But what if the everyday was the setup? By 5:15 p.m., the presidential security logs revealed something no one expected. At exactly 3:25 p.m., all 6 traffic cameras along Aminata's school route went dark simultaneously. Not a glitch. A coordinated blackout. At 5:42, a patrol team found her 2 bodyguards slumped near the drop-off, point pulse steady, pupils dilated. Lab results later confirmed a fast-acting sedative, military grade. General Mamadou, head of internal defense, said it first. This wasn't a random abduction, this was a message. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became a ransom. No claims, no fingerprints, just precision and silence. In geopolitics, that kind of silence is never innocent. For a leader who had just launched a crackdown on offshore corruption networks and revoked dozens of mining licenses, this wasn't just personal, it was retaliation. In a world where truth disrupts profits, what happens when power decides to strike through your blood? And more importantly, who dares to answer back? At 2:30 a.m., the encrypted line rang just once before President Traoré picked up. No greeting, just a voice, masked by static, speaking perfect French with a foreign edge. Cancel the nationalization law, cut ties with Beijing, halt all resource reforms, or your sister becomes merchandise in Amsterdam. Then silence, no repeats, no negotiations. In that moment, the air in the war room thickened. These weren't rebels. This was a calculated geopolitical threat, aimed straight at the spine of a reforming Africa. What they demanded wasn't money, it was a reversal of sovereignty. They didn't want Burkina Faso's gold. They wanted its silence. Traoré didn't flinch. He clenched his fist, eyes locked on the digital map of the mining corridors. They think fear controls the future, he said softly. But history only remembers those who refuse to bend. So when justice is held hostage, what kind of leader dares to answer without trembling? He didn't call the media, he didn't issue threats. By 3:10 a.m., Ibrahim Traoré summoned only 3 people: General Mamadou for security, Konate from intelligence, and Sarah Kama, head of cyber defense. The plan was simple: no noise, just precision. Traore looked each of them in the eye and said, "They think my sister is my weakness. They're wrong. They touched every child this continent has sworn to protect." That night, satellite relays lit up, dormant accounts were flagged, and digital firewalls cracked open. Retaliation wasn't rage, was structure. Because when the line between personal and political disappears, what kind of justice do we build in the dark? By dawn, Sarah Kamar's team had unraveled the first thread. The voice from the 2:30 a.m. call, it had been routed through 7 countries, with spoofed servers in Argentina, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Singapore, Canada, Nigeria, and finally, Switzerland. That's where the real signal began. But it didn't end there. A separate investigation unearthed a darker pattern. 73 Burkinabe schoolgirls had vanished over the past 2 years, all under the guise of student visas. Average age, 15. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was an organized pipeline, cloaked in paperwork, backed by profit. So when exploitation hides behind embassies and scholarships, who dares to put sovereignty above silence? On day 5, Ibrahim Traoré did something few leaders in his position would dare. He broke international protocol and went live on national television. No teleprompter, no diplomatic filters. Just a father, a soldier, a head of state. "They kidnapped Aminata to force me into retreat," he said, eyes unwavering. "But I will not trade my nation's dignity for her freedom. If we yield today, every daughter in Africa becomes currency." That night, number Save Aminata trended across 29 African countries, spilling into Latin America and parts of Europe. University students marched in Kinshasa. Radio hosts in Accra read his speech word for word. A new line had been drawn not just between Burkina Faso and its enemies, but between the old diplomacy of silence and a new politics of courage. So when a leader turns grief into resistance on live broadcast, what kind of continent rises with him? By day 6, the search had crossed borders and so did the resistance. Cyber Chief Sarah Kamar traced Aminata's location to a quiet district near Waalstraat, Amsterdam. Beneath a renovated warehouse, satellite scans showed a multi-exit underground chamber shielded by 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete. Estimated occupants, 40 to 50 men. A fortress. But Traoré didn't blink. He made 3 encrypted calls to Ghana, Mali, and Senegal. No press, no military ribbons. Just one message: this is no longer just about Burkina Faso. This is about every African child they think can be stolen without consequence. Each nation sent 2 elite commandos' names never recorded. Flights unmarked. From Accra to Bamako, from Dakar to Ouagadougou, a new alliance formed in silence, not ceremony. Because when sovereignty is violated in one corner of the continent, how long before the whole of Africa decides to strike back together? On Friday night, the quiet canals of Amsterdam hit a storm in motion. 18 elite operatives from Burkina Faso, Ghana, Mali, and Senegal slipped into the city under tourist visas, camera phones, sneakers, city maps. No one suspected a thing. At 2:45 a.m., Sarah Kamar's team breached the building's firewall remotely, disabling thermal sensors and biometric locks within 42 seconds. By 3:20 a.m., the team moved. No flash, no sound, just trained breath and purpose. A rescue was coming not with headlines, but with precision. When justice must travel in silence, across oceans and firewalls, what does it say about the world that forced it to? At exactly 3:22 a.m., Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie teams breached the compound from 3 synchronized entry points. No alarms, no shots. Only the precision of operatives who knew they were rescuing more than just hostages, they were reclaiming a continent's dignity. Within minutes, they found 47 girls, hidden in an underground holding area, one of them wrapped in a grey shawl, barefoot, but unbroken was Aminata Traoré. Her vitals were stable, her eyes alert. When confirmation reached the encrypted comms line, the war room back in Ouagadougou fell silent. And then came the voice of the president, choked, but steady. "I have found my sister." In that moment, power was not about retaliation, it was about recovery. A child was saved, a network was broken, a narrative was reclaimed. But as the girls were airlifted to safety under diplomatic cover, who was behind the masks that funded the silence? The rescue was just the beginning. In the hours that followed, 23 human traffickers were arrested across Amsterdam, Zurich, and Tangier, a web of brokers, facilitators, and white-collar collaborators. But what shocked the world wasn't just who was taken down, it was what they found. Confiscated laptops, encrypted ledgers, and offshore bank data revealed a multi-layered financial architecture, real estate firms in Brussels, dummy NGOs in Lisbon, and shadow accounts in Singapore linked by one motive: profit from stolen lives. At Ouagadougou International Airport, President Traoré stepped off the plane holding Aminata in one arm and a sealed evidence file in the other. Cameras rolled. But his voice didn't shake. "We didn't just save my sister. We saved 47 families and exposed something built to stay hidden." Because when exploitation wears a suit and holds a passport, who else at the table already knew? The fallout was immediate. The Netherlands launched a full-scale investigation into human trafficking oversight failures. In France and Belgium, leaked documents revealed passive complicity visa approvals waved through, inspections ignored, public outrage surged. 2 ministers in Brussels resigned, and media across Europe shifted from denial to damage control. Meanwhile, in Addis Ababa, President Traoré addressed the African Union not with anger, but with clarity. They don't just steal our children, they steal our minerals, our silence, our right to protect ourselves. His words ignited something deeper than politics. 32 African nations signed the Treaty for the Protection of African Children, establishing new cross-border protections, surveillance protocols, and emergency response units. For the first time, the continent wasn't reacting, it was organizing. Because when one child is taken and 32 nations stand up, is that the sound of Africa defending itself, finally reclaiming itself? 3 months later, Aminata Traoré walked back into her classroom. Same school uniform, same backpack, but she was no longer just a student, she was a symbol. Her smile returned, slowly. She laughed with friends again, but something had changed. At 15, she had seen the machinery of global exploitation and lived to tell it. In a televised interview, she said softly, "I wasn't just rescued, I was protected. Because my brother didn't fight alone, he made all of Africa my family." Across the continent, school murals featured her face, classrooms discussed her story, and community leaders cited her name when drafting new child protection codes. She became the reminder that protection isn't just a right, it must be a collective responsibility. Because when one girl stands back up after being targeted by a system, what kind of world are we shaping if we still let others fall unnoticed? 6 months after the rescue, Aminata's story no longer belonged to one family, it belonged to a continent. The Aminata Foundation was launched with the backing of all 54 African nations, not as charity, but as commitment. Headquarters in Addis Ababa, satellite offices in Dakar, Nairobi, and Kigali. Its first program? A real-time child protection radar, linking schools, borders, shelters, and hospitals across Africa in one encrypted network. Its second? Psychosocial rehabilitation hubs for survivors led by survivors. The motto, never invisible again. 1 year later, standing before the United Nations General Assembly, President Ibrahim Traoré didn't read a script. He raised Aminata's school ID badge and said, "The next trafficker who touches an African child won't face just a police officer. They'll face the will of 1.4 billion people." Since that day, 6 trafficking syndicates have collapsed, 18 nations have passed mirror laws, and over 830 children have been recovered. Because when one child's pain rewrites the policy of nations, what if every victim was seen not as a statistic but as the start of a revolution? They thought breaking him meant breaking us, but when they took Aminata, they didn't strike Ibrahim Traoré's weakness, they triggered his greatest strength. In a world where power often postures through coldness, he responded with something more dangerous than fear, protective love backed by law. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a rupture in the old order. What began as a private pain became a public indictment, not just of traffickers, but of systems that allowed them to exist. This story isn't about one family, it's about how family, when scaled to a nation, becomes a force no institution can contain. "They thought my family was my weakness," Traoré said before the African Union, "but they didn't know my family is 1.4 billion strong." That wasn't a speech, Lynn, it was a geopolitical statement. In the months that followed, Aminata returned to school, but her footsteps now echoed through courtrooms, policy chambers, and border stations. Her face became a clause in new law. Her survival became data-backed reform. The Aminata Foundation, backed by all 54 African nations, now maps missing children in real time, builds trauma recovery centers, and rewrites what protection means in post-colonial Africa. But this story also calls us out. Every official who turned a blind eye, every embassy that stamped a student visa without care, every journalist who asked the wrong questions, every school that failed to notice the silence of the missing. We now know where ignorance leads to hidden rooms, stolen names, and childhoods sold for influence. So the legacy of this rescue isn't about heroism, it's about accountability. It says to the world, protection is not charity, it's structure, it's vigilance. It's choosing not to look away, especially when it's inconvenient. And now, it's about you. Your silencer, your voice, your school board, your council, your timeline, your vote. Because justice doesn't happen on its own, it happens when protection becomes a collective instinct, not a delayed response. Save this video. Share it with someone who thinks Africa can't defend itself. Comment below because some truths aren't meant to fade with the algorithm. And if one president, armed with law and love, could face down a machine built to erase his sister, what could we build if we all refuse to look away?